Hello everyone, welcome to Asura Psych, and today I've got for you another question from a patron over on Patreon. This patron, much like the last one, also chose to remain anonymous. That's fine by me, but the question we're going to be talking about today is, do you have any advice for people who are attempting to type themselves, and what are the pitfalls that people should watch out for if they're attempting to self-type? So unlike a lot of other people in the type community, I tend to think that actually a good amount of people can type themselves correctly as long as they know the information correctly and they're not trying to mix too many things and systems together. So in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I would go about self-typing and the resources I would use if I was attempting to do this. Let's get into it. The biggest pitfall that I see people fall into when they join the typology community and they get into the process of starting to self-type is that they start to adapt or, attempt to work with more than one system at a time. So essentially people will come in and they'll see MBTI and then they'll see Socionics and then they'll see Enneagram and they'll start to kind of just try to fuse all these things together into one big conglomerate system. And unfortunately, that's not how type works. So my biggest recommendation, my first big piece of advice for someone who's going to be attempting to self-type is to make sure that you're approaching each personality system as its own system. You cannot treat MBTI the same as Socionics. Yes, they have overlapping systems, but they are not the same thing and they have differing definitions, which is why it's going to be extremely confusing for someone if they try to approach personality typology by kind of fusing all of these systems together at once. If you're going to be using a 4-function model, stick with a 4-function model. If you're going to be using an 8-function model, stick with an 8-function model, because the 4-function models are designed to represent the parts of the 8-function model in those top 4 functions. The 8-function models are different in that they attempt to explain things in an entirely different way. So remember that if you're going to be attempting to type yourself, make sure that you're not attempting to do it through all the different systems at once, and maybe recognize that if you are attempting to do this, that you might have different types across all of these systems. You might be an INTJ in MBTI, but you might not be one in Socionics due to the differing definitions. My next piece of advice is to make sure that you're using good source material when you're attempting to learn a new typology system. So essentially, if someone came to me and they asked, hey, I'd like to learn about MBTI and the 16 personality types and maybe attempt to type myself, because I don't really want to buy a typing session from a practitioner, I would say, okay, that's perfectly reasonable. What you should do is read the book Gifts Differing, because it's written by Myers-Briggs herself, and it is source material on the topic. If you read that book, you'll know exactly the real definitions of the cognitive functions in the MBTI model in particular. After someone has spent some time with Gifts Differing and they've found their MBTI type, then I might say to them, okay, you understand the basics. Now move on to maybe reading Carl Jung's Psychological Types, and you can understand the roots of where the MBTI types came from and how the cognitive functions work on a deeper, more psychological level. This applies for any typology system, though. If you're going to be attempting to learn some new typology system, make sure you do your best to follow a reliable source for information. Don't start reading random blog posts online, and I know that might be even stereotypical as someone who creates content online for typology systems, but what you want to differentiate is whether or not this person that you're following or learning from is someone who's just giving you stereotypes about types, or are they actually explaining the things that are going to be defining the types and why these things make the types the way they are and why the functions work in the way they are. Now, this is going to, again, differ for each typology system, but try to look for reliable information and sources of information when you're attempting to learn these new typology systems. When it comes to self-evaluation, it's commonly believed in the typology community that you can't see yourself, but unfortunately scientific research doesn't support this idea. Almost all of scientific objective survey-based research is self-report, and people tend to self-report relatively accurately in terms of personality. The difficult part is MBTI uses cognitive functions, and the actual MBTI formal assessment is a trait measurement system, and you can't associate traits with functions. So when you're measuring the MBTI traits and you have an MBTI type, you can't one-to-one correlate that with cognitive functions. So it's very hard for people to self-evaluate themselves in terms of trait compared to type. So what you need to do is make sure that when you're kind of learning typology more in depth and you get past just the letter dichotomies, that you understand the implications of the cognitive functions there and really evaluate, am I relating to this cognitive function? Is this something important to me? One thing that I recommend to people is if they have a friend who's very close to them, someone that they think knows them really well, maybe ask them what they think about some of the cognitive functions in relation to them. Ask them questions like, do you think I'm like this, or do you think I think like this, from an outsider's point of view? You could even have someone take an MBTI assessment for you as you. So ask someone to maybe go take like 16personalities.com and answer in the way that they think you would answer, and see how that differs from how you see yourself. And in that way, you'd be able to see how outsiders see you as an individual versus how you see yourself as an individual. And these, a lot of the times, can be very different because it's hard for some people to see themselves, and that's why practitioners exist. While I do think it's possible for many people to type themselves effectively if they understand the source material, some people are just kind of blind to looking inwards. And that's why I don't think it's inherently a bad thing to have a practitioner help you, or to maybe get someone else on the outside help you understand your own personality type. All right, everybody, those are my pieces of advice for people who might be interested in self-typing themselves or learning about typology in a more kind of correct manner, in a way that's not going to confuse them as much. Make sure that you're learning from the correct source materials. Make sure you're viewing yourself as objectively as you can. Maybe ask other people, and make sure that the outside sources that you're going to be learning from, the ones that aren't from source materials, are going to be people who are fairly either respectable or people who you can look to and say, okay, they at least know a little bit about what they're talking about. They're not just talking about stereotypes. They're actually giving, depth and realistic information with the topics at hand. So with typing in mind, I am going to plug myself here. If you're interested in having yourself typed and learning more about your personality type, I do have personality typing sessions available at my website, asurapsych.com, if you're interested in working with me to find out what your personality type is and what that means for you. Other than that, let me know if you enjoyed this video down in the comment section below, or if you have any advice for people who also might need help when it comes to self-typing. This has been Asura from Asura Psych. Have a good one.